All right. Hey, could you grab me some Dr. Pepper while you're over there? And I'll get started while you're... I'll get started. I'll wait on it. All right, everybody, we on pause for just a moment. It don't mean walk in front of it, don't matter. All right, let's see how we are. I got to get caught up exactly where we were anyway, make sure I remember what I wanted to say. So I did have something I wanted to bring. Oh, yeah, I remember. Yeah. I should have wrote it down. Here I go, hoping I can do everything by memory. I'm getting old. We've already talked about this.
Me too.
You know you're getting old when you start questioning the math that you're doing when you're trying to figure out how old you are. You're like, I can't. That's not a good sign. Okay, you guys ready? All right. You guys ready online? And we're ready then. All right, everybody. Father, we pray that this finds people with open eyes and open ears, and as always, in Jesus' name, amen. All right, today is Wednesday, January 18th, 2023, and this is my little Bible study, and we're continuing with our line-by-line, verse-by-verse study of the book of Exodus, okay? All right, now we're going to pick it up in chapter 16, verse 22 here in just a minute. All right, I want to remind you of some things, though, up to this point. All right, because now we're on the other side of the Red Sea. They've established a few things that they went through. We've already looked at a couple of the feasts that will develop out of this whole scene coming out of the Exodus. So we looked at then a little bit of law. But the thing that I wanted to remind you was about the plagues in Egypt, okay? Because when we studied the book of Revelation, we did a really pretty thorough job of correlating those with the plagues in Egypt and even Moses in the last days in the book of Revelation. And I think that's very important to remember that you're going to see these again, okay? These plagues that came out of the book of Exodus, you're going to see fulfilled again in the book of Revelation, most probably with Moses leading it all again. If you consider that Moses and Elijah are the one on the Mount of Transfiguration, right? And they're the last two witnesses that are transfigured at the very end anyway. So it just kind of follows that makes a little bit of sense. And since Moses is the man in the book of Exodus, well, that God's working with, it makes perfect sense and that you'd see them all again. Now, from the standpoint of being in Egypt then, it means these miracles are either going to be in your life a blessing, like they were to Israel, or they're going to become a cursing, like they were to Egypt, and anybody that followed the Egyptians. And of course, the reason why is because of the Antichrist. Then, if you bear the mark of the beast, well, to die, guess what? It's a curse to you. But if you bear the mark of God and seals in your hand, and it's evidenced by your labor of your hands, which we've studied before, well, then you don't have a problem. God's not mad at you. All right, and that's a really important thing to remember from the book of Exodus. And that goes all the way down to an individual, also a nation. All right, a nation that's truly following God, not worshiping the Antichrist, well, guess what? They don't have to worry about a wrath. But that's not what the Bible says. The Bible says that when the Antichrist shows that the world worships him, except for a few, right? Particularly at first, right? They're the first out. They're the first eight. That's right. They're the first dessert, so to speak. Yeah. Right, it's a national level, right? That's exactly right. Now, that protection then goes all the way down. An individual standing in the midst of all that chaos and be blessed by God, standing right there in the middle of it. It won't affect you, right? You got to remember, because at some time in the future, then that's 150-pound hailstones that are zipping around, especially around Jerusalem, if you happen to be there at that time. So that's gets to be important, right? Right. Remember hail? We got 150 pounds. We got intensified out of the book of Exodus, and if you remember in Exodus, it killed everything that was outside, right?
It'll be like the size of Volkswagen.
That's right, 150 pounds greater, right? That's a big hailstone, right? That's huge, right? That'll take down any modern tank and take down everything, right? So I just wanted to remind everybody of that then. This stuff in the book of Exodus, remember, all these things are in samples for those that will follow those in the last days, right? So the whole book. So it's a big warning. Amos chapter 8, verses 11 tells you that we've came up and been raised in a time where there's a spiritual famine where the actual Bible is not really taught. All right? And that hurts. You go into town, right? You go into church, you go to church all your life. I grew up in church too. I mean, and you sit there, right, yeah, you're like writing a new book. It's great. But I grew up in church too. I had to sit back and reevaluate through much pain, much of my life based on what the Bible actually says versus what people say about it, most likely, right? It's going to become very important this Sunday when we do, because we're in the Garden of Eden, so we're in the sin in the garden. And it's very important to keep all that in mind, that we grew up in a time when you're not going to hear too much really about the Bible, even in church.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's supported by the 7 letters of the 7 churches in the book of Revelation. It's also supported by Jeremiah and Ezekiel and the Holy Prophets, all the way down through the ages, right? So, realizing that we live in that time, it makes it easy then, all right, to not partake in it. And we got the book. Everybody does. Most people do. And if with a little bit of work, you can find somebody that knows a little bit about it. And with a little bit more work, you can learn a lot about it, especially over time. And the way that we do it, basically an hour at a time, a couple days a week, and that's more than most people can deal with.
Yep.
You're truly studying, because there's a lot you got to break down, a lot you got to think about. I'm sure you're running into a little bit of that, especially after the last time lesson that we were there. Anyway, let's get on with the book of Exodus, though. Okay, we got a lot of cool stuff going on in it too. And like I said, all this reflects directly upon us in the last days, and we'll see a bunch of this again. Which reminds me, we're up to talking about manna, right? Which was where we were. Now, if you remember, God tells them what you say. You go out, you collect some omer per person for 6 days, and after 6 days, you collect double that per person, right? So, right, and if they didn't do that, if they tried to gather too much on just a regular day, by the next morning it was destroyed. It was goo. Yeah, it was goo. It smelled bad and had worms in it. Except when they do it on the 6th day, all right? And that's kind of where we are. That's where we pick it up. In verse 22, that's where it is exactly. And it came to pass that on the 6th day, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers per one man. And all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. 23, and he said unto them, this is that which the Lord hath said. Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto the Lord. Bake that which you will bake today, and seeth that you will see it, that ye will see it, and that which remaineth lay over up for you to keep until morning. All right, so here we go. It's for the Sabbath then, all right? So you don't have to get up and work. You're all set up and ready to go. And they laid it up till morning, and you're going to have to forgive me because I'm going to really stumble through this night. I'm tired and I don't have my glasses, so it's going to be a long night for everybody. All right? And they laid up till morning as Moses bade, and it did not stink, neither was there any worm therein. So they did exactly what God said, and it came out exactly what they needed. And remember, he told them, when you gather it, he who needs much, won't lack anything. Who needs just a little, you're not going to be short anything. Nobody will, right? If you follow the rules. All right, now, remember, this is bread from heaven. This is angels' food. I got tongue-tied last week. I think it's on Psalm 78. Talks about this, refers to this as angels' food, but it also calls it corn from heaven. That he fed them with corn from heaven, and this is the manna that I was talking about. Now, this manna is really cool because if you remember, it appears behind the dew. As the dew comes up, manna appears, and then as the sun comes up really hot, it melts and disappears. Right? Yeah, but apparently in the nutrition system we brought out last week how it sustains both angelic bodies and human bodies at the same time, as do our food can do also for them. Yep. All right. Nonetheless, verse 25, and Moses said, eat that today, for today is the Sabbath unto the Lord, and today ye shall not find it in the field. 6 days shall ye gather it, but on the 7th day, which is the Sabbath, in it there shall be none. All right, so on the Sabbath day, there's not even going to be any manna up here. All right, and it came to pass that there went out some of the people on the 7th day to gather, and they found none. Remember, what did God say? We covered this last week. What did he say? He said, I'm going to test these people with this, with the manna. Remember, everything that they're doing then was a test. He wanted to see, okay, will they follow basic instructions is really what it comes down to. And will you follow verbal instructions? He's going to find that now in the Marine Corps, there's there's something in the Marine Corps that they call the 10%. And no matter how elite your unit is, you always got the bottom 10% that are just barely not quite getting there. And that's just the infamous 10%. You hear about them the whole time you're in. Yeah, if you're a relative, he can tell you about the 10% that's in the Marine Corps right now. He can tell you about the 10%. They're everywhere. But anyway, it's kind of just a family because, like I said, no matter how elite you are, you always got the bottom 10% they can't afford. But they kind of, these guys, you seems like there's probably a lot more than 10% anymore. But here you got these 10% that just can't quite get it. You know, they're a little bit behind the power curve. They've seen all these things just like everybody else, but yet they've heard the commands, don't do it, do it. But yet they still can't get with it. They slept in, they didn't pay attention, whatever the reason was. Got drunk the night before, don't know. But either way. And the Lord said unto Moses, how long refuse you to keep my commandments and my laws? Which, remember, that's the only thing he wants out of people. Is just follow my commandments and laws and I'll bless you. Like I said, other nations will be envious if you just do it, right? See, for that what the Lord hath given you, see, for that the Lord hath given you the Sabbath, therefore he giveth you on the 6th day the bread for 2 days. Abide you every man in his place, let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. So the people rested on the 7th day. And the house of Israel called the name thereof manna. And it was like coriander seed, white, and it tastes as if it were wafers made with honey. So that sounds like a pretty good meal. That's right. So in the mornings, they have manna, and then in the evenings, they have quail. All right, now, it doesn't sound like these people are hurting any, right? That's right, and they came out of, but you got to remember, they're conditioned. These people are conditioned to have things kind of presented to them. They were slaves, so they didn't really have to worry about being protected, gathering their own food, unless they were the actual ones gathering it, but they were going to get to eat. And here, these people are being provided for in exactly the same way, only but by God himself. And it's like they're always complaining and whining that they got enough, we don't need this. Nothing ever changes. It's exactly the same way today, especially in the house of Israel. There's the 10 tribes that I'm talking about, not Judah, and there's the house of Judah. But, they're pretty well off. They don't, when was the last time anybody was hungry? Right. Right. So we bear a lot of those same earmarks even out of the garden, which I'm plugging next week, I guess, or this Sunday, I guess, tonight. But you're going to find a lot of those earmarks there in the Garden of Eden, just the same, that make up this house of Israel, all right? Verse 32, and Moses said, this is the thing which the Lord commandeth, fill an omer of it to be kept for your generations. That's plural, so that's all of them, all right? That we're included in, by the way, I would add. That they may see the bread wherewith I fed you in the wilderness, when I brought you forth from the land of Egypt. Now, remember, it was spoiling by the next day, except on the Sabbath. Here he says, take an omer, all right, and you're going to take it and you're going to keep it, and you're going to show the people from generation to generation the actual bread that I fed you, and that I fed you, the actual bread, all right? And he's promising them that it's going to keep and hold until all generations, all right? So that's a pretty good thing. Now, remember that this is a little bit early, but they've not even got the Ark of the Covenant yet, right? They've not even made it yet. But it would no doubt be a part of those possessions of that inner sanctum. And other prophets refer to it. Is it not there? Is the bread not there? You see it. You know it's there. All right, so others, it's something that's actually kind of documented. Same with the serpent in the wilderness, which we'll talk about Moses when they have a plague of serpents. So he hammers out a serpent and hangs it on the cross and tells them to present himself before the cross, and you won't die of the poison. Well, that brazen serpent stayed with Israel for a long, long time, and there was Hezekiah, I think it was. He noticed that people started worshiping this serpent, instead of God. They're looking at this serpent to heal them and to help them and things like that. He had it destroyed as an idol, ground up into dust, and completely destroyed, just like the law requires them to do. So there's a whole bunch, right? That's right. The golden calf, right? That's coming up. We'll get on to that. All right. But nonetheless, all right. So he's promising them, then it's just going to hold for the rest of the time. So remember in the book of Revelation, we saw the Ark of the Testament there in heaven, so it's undoubtedly there with them, probably with Aaron's staff and So all the other stuff, table, showbread, right, all things from the actual temple, right? All right. Verse 33, and Moses said unto Aaron, take a pot and put an omer full of manna therein and lay it up before the Lord to keep for your generations. And the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron laid it up before the testimony to keep it. And the children of Israel did eat manna 40 years until they came to the land inhabited. They did eat manna. So for 40 years, God's kept us up with these people. All right. Now, we've been talking a lot about the slave generation. All right. Now, but remember, there's not just the slave generations. Those slaves had children.
Yeah.
Right? And if you remember, there was a mixed multitude that walked out of Egypt with Israel. It wasn't just the Israelis as far as the bloodline goes. All right? So, do I really want to get into that right now? All right, hold on. Let's go ahead and finish this up real good. And the children for 40 years, and they inhabited the land, all right, until they came into the borders of the land of Canaan. Now, an omer is a tenth part of an ephah. So an omer is, depending on whose measurements you're really going with, it's about a little more than a half a gallon, probably.
So what's an ephah? What's that?
An ephah is a little more than a half a gallon, and it's a tenth part of an ephah. Or excuse me, a tenth part is a little more than a half a gallon.
Okay.
So it's like saying a bushel.
Right.
It'd probably be like a bushel. I think an equivalent would probably be bushel. But it would probably be that. Now, I'm going to go back and get into this, all right, because I just can't lay it down. All right, these kids, you got to remember that. They had this generation that they were slaves, so they were used to being provided for, but you had these kids that were born to them right there at the end.
Yeah, into
and
freedom,
they all
pretty
walked
much,
out,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
They all walked out of Egypt. But now they're responsible. God will tell you here in that book of Exodus, sooner or later we'll hit it. It'll tell them, it said, those kids that came out of Egypt, I don't hold them responsible for what their parents did.
Yeah.
Right? And the generation he was talking about that was going to wipe out was their parents, because they didn't. But the kids, he said, I don't hold them responsible. They were just basically, they were doing what mom and dad said to do. All right, so now think about that. These kids were 40 years old.
Yeah.
All right, so if they were born at the Exodus, by the time they get to go to the land of Canaan, they're 40 years old. So these kids, now you talk about kids, it ain't a matter of faith with these kids. These kids don't remember a time when God wasn't actively working for their protection and their benefit. All right? They remember when they were kids, the pillar of fire, the pillar of a cloud. They remember the Egyptians dying in the sea.
Yeah.
All right? They remember seeing their bodies. They remember these things.
bread.
They remember that when they were hungry, quail came up out of the ground, and when they were thirsty, he tapped a rock and water comes out, which we're getting ready to get into. All right? So they remember these things. So, boy, when these guys get ready to go into the promised land, they enter it with a whole different mindset than their parents and their grandparents did. They entered it not as, oh my God, there are going to be giants over there. This is our home, and we're going to stay there. And they really do. They took it over. But that's just something I wanted to point out. God's not mad at these kids. You'll find out, like I said, later on. But these kids, they grow up. They ain't even a matter of faith with these people. That generation, they ain't faith. They see it.
Yeah.
It's something they know. It's something they depend on. It's something that's happening every day in their lives. So their mindset's completely different than when they actually do go into the land of Canaan. And that's why they prosper so well. All right, but that was something I just kind of wanted to point out about that. And like I said, we'll run into it and I'll point it out again. Now, you go back to the whiny bunch. Their parents, not these kids, but their parents. And listen to what they got to say about that. Because this sounds like a lot of people I know today, right now. All right, and listen to what it says. And all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin, after their journeys, according to the commandment of the Lord, and pitched at Rephidim, where there was no water for the people to drink. And so they got out here, they made a new tent site, and there's no water. Listen to what they say. Wherefore the people did chide with Moses and said, to chide, that means they're just riding his butt. They're on him. They're wow. And listen to what they're saying. With chide with Moses and said, give us water that we may drink. All right. And Moses said unto him, why chide ye with me? Wherefore do ye tempt the Lord? All right, Moses, he's already got the plan. He already knows what's going down. Like I said, he gave a manna for Moses' sake. If you remember last week, it wasn't for anything they did. It was because Moses was the one that was towing the line. And he knew it, and he did it for Moses' sake. All right. Now, so they're down there, and so they just fed them. He's made sure they ate better than they ever have probably in their life. And now they're whining about water because they don't think they have anything to drink. And they immediately go with Moses. Now, you got to think about it. They may have been slaves in Egypt, but I'm sure that as slaves they were privy to certain things, like how to dig wells and how to find water where they lived. All right. So there's some of them, somewhere out of 3 million, you had a handful of people that knew enough about the geology of the area, where to find how to survive in the desert, something, because they'd been doing it with the Egyptians and they figured that. But instead of looking for any resources for themselves, the first thing they do is run to Moses and want a miracle to give them water. I mean, they didn't even make an attempt. They went, as soon as they were thirsty, went to Moses, we need water, give us water. Man, can you imagine being Moses? It's got to make you want to get a gun and start shooting. I mean, it's got to drive him kind of batty after a while. I mean, think about it. All right. But nonetheless, 17 verse 2, wherefore the people did chide with Moses and say, give us water that we may drink. And Moses said unto, we already did that, right. Verse 3, I guess is where we're at then. And the people thirsted there for water. And the people murmured against Moses and said, wherefore is this that thou hast brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our cattle with thirst? Well, listen to that.
How many times are they going to say that?
That's right. Yeah, how many times? And now they're dragging their kids in. Look what you're doing, my baby. All right. Moses, look what you're doing. You're killing my little baby. All right. Moses going to get a stick and start whacking people.
Yeah.
Him and Aaron Bow. All right. But nonetheless, they go to Moses. So listen to what Moses says. As Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, all right, so he just takes it straight to God. Look, he's probably frustrated. I can imagine by now he's hit a degree of frustration with this. All right. And Moses cried unto the Lord and said, what shall I do unto this people that they be almost ready to stone me? They want to kill me. All right. And the Lord said unto Moses, go on before the people, and take ye with thee the elders of Israel. So get all of them guys. Get them guys that think they know so much. Get them ready. All right. And thy rod, the same one that he hit the water, same one we've been talking about, the same one he threw down and turned into a snake that ate Pharaoh's snake, ate the rods of the Pharaoh's snakes, right? Same rod. Behold, I will stand before thee upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so on the side of the elders of Israel, all right? So they got their water. Now, I want to talk about this rock, because I don't think this is just some rock that was laying around in the area, right? He calls it the rock.
The rock.
Go get the rock, all right, in Horeb. Okay. Now, this is kind of my opinion, but I think it holds a little bit of water. Right? Remember Jacob, the father of all the patriarchs. Remember he lays down, he has a dream where he puts his head on a rock. Right? And he has a dream exactly about some of the stuff that we study, where he sees a staircase where souls are ascending to heaven from earth and then descending from heaven to earth. And he sees it, and this dream affects him in such a way that he picks up the rock and he keeps it with him. All right? Well, he has all the patriarchs, and they all end up in Egypt. So the rock, most likely, in my mind, remember, because what did Moses do? He said, I'm going to take Joseph's bones, just like we promised. Yeah. We promised we'd take them home when we leave. And so if he took Joseph's bones, he probably had the rock too. Yeah. And they would have kept it and brought it with them. Yeah. All right, because it's part of their lineage, it's part of theirs. Yeah. Well, if this is so, that means that this very rock is now in Scotland. And, Edward, King Charles, that just got crowned, was coronated over it. All right? All the kings of Israel, or all the kings of England have all been coronated over it. All right? And it's a part of prophecy. But now it's been overturned yet again. Last time it went from England all the way back. That was why the queen, before she died, was there. She wasn't in England. She was in Scotland as soon as she was going to die. As soon as she dies, well, the new king has to be coronated, and that's that rock in Scotland. That's all of them have been coronated over. I believe it's probably the same one that Moses strikes with the rock and feeds all the people. It would have been a part of their history from Joseph, from the time he had the dream all the way up until now and even past. Right. So it's probably one of those artifacts that they kept with them. Well, that's just kind of my thought, and it's kind of interesting to think, man, that thing's still around then.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really kind of cool because that ties all of us right back to that.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, verse 7, and he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah because of the chiding of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? So that's just kind of, they're just getting a little bit gutsy on that one, all right? All right, now, here we're going to enter a new character here in chapter 17. We're going to go ahead and finish up chapter 17 tonight, all right? I know we're running a little bit. I ain't got but just a little bit more anyway. All right, verse 8. Now we're going to have a new character named Amalek being introduced. Now, Amalek, if you'll take a Strong's and look up who he is, you'll find out he's one of the descendants of Esau. Okay, so these people look a lot like Jacob's people. They are Jacob's people. It's Jacob's brother.
Yeah.
Right? And if you remember the book of Genesis, you remember they got a nice big history with some stuff goes on through all through that. Well, looks like Esau's relatives are there to settle the score. All right? Because to them, they appear to be these people stranded without a home, running away. Now it's time for some payback. Because of the things, just because of past things that went down with Jacob and with Esau. Okay? So nonetheless, so here we have Amalek is the guy. And then came Amalek and fought with Israel and Rephaim. And Moses said unto Joshua, choose us out men, go out, fight with Amalek tomorrow, and I will stand on top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. All right? And Joshua did as Moses had said to him, and fought with Amalek. Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Now, many people believe this Hur is a guy that eventually marries their sister Miriam. I don't know, maybe not, it doesn't matter, but just kind of something to think about. But either way, he's important enough that he's right there. So something's going on. He's there for a reason. He might have been, over there dating their sister. Right, he was over there. Yeah, maybe.
Maybe he was
just by that, right. Maybe, right. But either way, he's there, and he's there with them. All right, now picture that. You got Moses and Aaron and Hur up on top of this mountain. You got Joshua with his troops in the valley fighting with Amalek, all right, who is also the patriarch of Russia, the Russian people. Just to go ahead and update that all the way to today. Right, they're a very hardy bunch. Right. All right. Oh. Where were you? Verse 10? So Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with Amalek. Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up on top of the hill. And it came to pass, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. All right, so we have some stipulations, all right? Now, this has always bothered me. Why? Why couldn't Moses just stand there with a stick in his hand like this and just watch? All right. And it took a long time I had to be told actually probably what the answer was. But, okay, let's go on. Listen to what it says. But Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone and put it under him and sat him thereon. So Moses, when I was as a young man in boot camp, one of the worst things they'd ever made you do is just take your M16 and hold it straight out.
Yeah.
Just like this. Weighs 6 pounds.
Yep.
But it takes
gets heavy
30 seconds, you're dying. Yep. All right, so Moses has been there a good chunk of the day. So he's held his hands up. Imagine a staff, a pretty good sized staff, just holding your hands up like this. See how long you can stand there and hold your hands up. All right, well, he can't get it done. Every time he puts his arms down the raft, Amalek starts prevailing against Joshua. All right, so he puts them back up. So they see this, and then they get a stone and have Moses sit down on it. All right. And Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side, and his hands were stayed up until the going down of the sun. And Joshua, okay, now, why? What is that? What is the object lesson of this scene? Because it's too specifically laid out not to have a reason. And I think it's tied directly to the last days. It's about the people who will testify. There's all kinds. There's all kinds of people. You got some that are just quietly sitting there supporting the church that's actually trying to teach the Bible to people. And that's a very important job. For some, that's what they do. They got others that are preachers. You got others that's the secretaries. She's a good secretary. She's balancing books. She's working everything, making sure the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. That's a great job. It takes everybody to get it done. Could have sat there and just had Moses sitting up there at the top, and as long as you stand up there and watch them, they're going to prevail. But he didn't. He went through this whole object lesson that Moses can't get it done by himself. Okay? And that's going to be reflected again in the next chapter. All right, but nonetheless, with a group, with work from everybody involved, all right, Israel prevails over one of their sworn enemies. All right? And I just think that's probably applies directly to us in the last days.
To me, it's
that
also
everybody has a part.
Everybody has really relied on Moses up until now.
That's right. That
Maybe
is.
It's a representation of you guys need to help.
That's true, because Moses will not go into the promised land. And the other character was just introduced that's going to lead him, and it was Joshua who will actually lead him into the promised land.
Right.
And that all is right here where Joshua first gets picked up.
So
Just drawn from that, you can tell then that Moses has definitely taken Joshua under his wing.
Right.
Because he sent him, he's made him prepared for tactical battle. He's got troops. He told Joshua, you know your men, pick out your men, and go and do what you got to do. All right, so there's been a lot more undoubtedly unfolding, even before this, probably with Joshua and Moses, that we don't really know. But they're going to get 40 years to work on it. All right, so Joshua's very prepared by the time they actually do go into the promised land. All right. And Joshua, I love this. And Joshua, discomforted Amalek and his people with the edge of his sword. Discomforted. That means killed. He slaughtered them. Yeah, that was what he needed to do. That was the point. All right? They were blatantly attacked. Esau's bunch, Amalek attacked them. A defenseless group, truly, doing their own thing. All right? And the Lord said unto Moses, write this as memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua. All right? So I think the fact that he's telling them to rehearse it in the ears of Joshua at this point, Moses hasn't done anything to get kept out of the promised land at this point, but he's already telling you, write all this down and you tell Joshua to remember it, all right? Because I think he's already got a plan with Moses. We've talked about that before. All right? I think that's just one of the things. That's why he's emphasizing, not you, Moses, you tell Joshua. You make sure Joshua remembers. All right. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it Jehovah Nissim. And he said, because the Lord has sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Now remember, this is Esau's group. Now look at what's going on in the world. Yeah, they're Russia right now. All right, and got their finger in every little pot all around the road, starting trouble. Right, always. Remember one thing about Esau, he's vanished to the northern countries, right? Always looking for food. He traded his birthright for soup, and they're always still looking for food because they're hungry. There's a lot of them, and they don't have the best. They're agrarian, but they're living the worst part of the place to be agriculturally based.
2 months
right.
to go. Yeah.
That's right, and we'll get into all that when we finish up the book of Genesis, because we're probably not going to stop just with what we talked about. We're just going to probably keep diddling right on through it and just do the whole book. Yeah, because it's must-know stuff anyway, so we might as well do it. You'll either learn it now or you learn it later. But either way, you learn it now or you learn it in the millennium, but either way, you'll know it. All right, and that gets us through 17, all right? Now, we're going to stop here for tonight, but I want to go ahead and talk about this, okay? It's chapter 18. Chapter 18 in the book of Exodus is another one of those parenthetical chapters, all right? It's inserted right here between 17 and 19. And like the other parenthetical chapter that we studied in the book of Revelation, you remember it was a seal and the elect, and it occurred right in between the sixth and the seventh seals. So even though it's parenthetical and it was inserted, it's inserted into the exact spot that it needed to be to get the best understanding out of it. Well, this is exactly the same way. Now, remember we were just warned with Abimelech, right? Well, we're going back to meet Jethro's father-in-law, Ruel, the one that, Moses' father-in-law, Ruel, the one that he always calls Jethro, right? Yeah, means your excellency, right. And so he goes over there to meet him. And really what this chapter is doing is showing that all of that lineage that comes from Jacob was all moved out away from Abimelech at this point, because he goes, and we're going to pick it up with Jethro. Now, most people that really study this really good try to say that this whole chapter right here actually unfolds in Numbers chapter 10, right between verses 10 and 11. Okay, and that's where this actually occurs, is there. But for some reason, it's inserted in a parenthetical manner here in the book of Exodus. All right, so I don't know what all that means, but there you go. That's just the way it is. But what all this is we're talking about, you're talking about how it takes everybody, all right? Well, here, this is going to be a part of that setup, and we'll get into that next Thursday. But it has to do with their judicial system. And really what you see here in this chapter, not just as it is parenthetical, but one of the things that's emphasized is their judicial system. And that's what we're going to be talking about, because Moses is the only judge.
Yeah.
Got 3 million people. And pretty soon, it's just all Moses does is judge cases, and they're not going anywhere. They're not doing nothing. Nothing's getting finished because they're all waiting on one judge. And so that goes. They've got to come up with another way to do it. And Jethro becomes instrumental as Moses' father-in-law, and actually pointing that out to Moses. It's like, you have to, it just doesn't work. It's going to kill you, right?
Hold the whole nation.
That's right. You can't do it all yourself, right? And that goes back to them holding up his arms, and it takes everybody to actually get it done.
Right.
And we'll get into all that. We'll start with the parenthetical chapter next week on Thursday, and then we'll move into the next one, which or Wednesday, yeah. And just continue then on into the next chapter after that. But that's it for tonight then. You guys have a good night.